When I watched the trailer of this movie, I got a pretty determined opinion about it. This is going to be some violent Viking movie with a twist at the end, and I wasn't too far off. But is it a bad thing? In case with this movie, certainly not. Please be warned that this contains heavy spoilers ahead. Let's start my analysis of this movie with the characters. Hamlet is the main character. His father was killed in front of him and he was just a child and he craves revenge above all else. He doesn't really live all his life. He just exists in this violent dream, craving father's killer's blood. This actually could be a pretty precise description of him, but it goes a little bit deeper than that. Hamlet is a very destiny and prophecy driven person, and he thinks that his destiny is to avenge his father's death. Although he most certainly has a lot of resentment and anger inside of him, in my opinion this destiny-believing trait also influences him quite a lot. This may be due to the fact that the last thing he did together with his father was destiny-predicting ritual. While on his journey of revenge he meets this Slavic girl Olga, with whom he falls in love with. This love almost breaks his need for revenge, but then his strong belief in destiny comes into play, and that, not anger, pushes him over the edge to make sure that father's murderer meets his death. I think that Hamlet is a good character, but he is not special in any way. Just like he serves the role of his prophecy, he also serves the plot of this movie. And that is not a bad thing, but it makes me acknowledge that this is a plot-driven movie, not character-driven one. Olga of the Birch Forest is the girl Hamlet falls in love with. There is not a lot of backstory for her, so I didn't care about Olga that much. However, she brings out best in Hamlet, to the point he reconsiders his revenge plans to get a peaceful life with Olga. In the end this doesn't happen, but Olga shows that Hamlet still has feelings and hope left inside of him, which makes viewer to relate and care about him more, which is important. The villains of the Northman is Fjolnir the brotherless and Hamlet's mother Queen Gudrun. I put them both together because they share the same backstory. In my opinion they are pretty decent villains, but the reason for this is not that they are extremely evil or extravagant. The reason is that they have their own story and they fight their own fight, which opposes our hero Hamlet. This gives the movie an interesting dynamic and change of perspective at the end. The Northman has a great vibe, and this is due to the fact that this is not just a brutal Viking movie. It has these omnipresent supernatural forces and prophecy, and the movie weighs heavily on Viking mythology. For me it was great. It made the movie more exciting, but if you want a realistic historic movie, then the Northman really is not your cup of tea. It's just not realistic by no means. I would like to dwell more deeply in the mythology aspect of the movie first, because for it, it's very important. There are some explanations to do, and while character actions may not be realistic, the mythology itself tries to be accurate. I am saying tries, because when I researched this topic I found out that there is not that much known about how the actual rituals happened, because it was so long ago and Vikings didn't leave precise descriptions behind. The movie tries to be accurate and fills in the unknown parts. Let's start with the Viking Seid or magic. Basically, it is a shamanistic ritual which tries to predict and also change the future. Hamlet takes part in this ritual and this influences basically all his life, as he is absolutely determined that he needs to avenge his father. The prophecy of this ritual is taken very seriously, and Hamlet never even questions it. This is due to the fact that these were primitive times, and magic was as real to them as electricity is to us. The ritual at the start of the movie is also a spirit animal ritual. Hamlet is given wolf as his spirit animal because he and his father act like wolves, and this spiritually bounds Hamlet to the wolf. Later in the movie, Hamlet is regarded also as the bear. because he joins a specially brutal Viking group which connects themselves to bears. In reality, these especially brutal Viking groups took some psychedelic drugs to bring themselves into trance-like state to go and fight. They have been recorded as fighting whilst howling and foaming at the mouth. These animalistic traits clearly bound them to wolves and bears, as they are the most powerful Nordic animals. At this point Hamlet is a wolf-bear. The wolf reference emerges also later in the movie when Hamlet comes to Iceland. Wolves and bears don't live in Iceland, but Arctic foxes do. The fox guides Hamlet there, and in my opinion this is due to the fact that Hamlet's spiritual animal is wolf, but wolves and foxes are related. The Northman features the main god in Old Norse and German mythology, Odin. Odin is the world creator, and he also created the first two people, Ask and Embla. But Odin himself doesn't make appearance in the Northman. The ravens are the ones who do. But ravens are directly connected to Odin. In the mythology, Odin has two raven pets, Hugin and Munin. In the movie there are more ravens, but still this is a direct indication that Odin watches over our main character. In mythology, ravens are the ones who help Odin watch over the world and gather information. Ravens help Hamlet greatly by releasing him from captivity. This means that Odin is favoring Hamlet in his quest. But this is also connected to Hamlet's father, because Hamlet's father's spiritual animal is Raven. In the movie he is referred to as the Raven King multiple times. This may indicate that ravens releasing Hamlet from captivity could be his father's spirit. His father's spirit also could be one of the Odin's ravens. You see, in this movie everything has symbolic meaning and interpretation. A mythological tree is featured in the Northman, where family members are connected to its branches. I interpret this as some combination of simple meaning of the family tree, with the tree featured in Norse mythology. Its name is on the screen. I will not try to pronounce this. It's a sacred tree, but it doesn't have to do anything with the human family. It's a thing that holds cosmos together, and gods go hang out there. An interesting explanation of this tree is that it is a Milky Way. It's not hard to see Milky Way as a tree. You have to consider that in Viking era Earth wasn't polluted, and sky was very clear, so you could see Milky Way very clearly. In my opinion, the Northman combines family tree with this Norse mythological tree to make the movie more epic and relevant to the Viking mythology. I would like to explain what are Valkyries and Valhalla. Valkyrie means chooser of the slain, and they do exactly that. Valkyries are female figures who guide the souls of deceased Nordic soldiers in Valhalla and Folkvanger. An interesting fact is that pop culture and also the Northman only features Valhalla, but in actual mythology only half of the souls go to Valhalla, the other half goes to Folkvanger. Folkvanger means the field of people, and goddess Freya rules over it. The reason why pop culture avoids Folkvanger is that there are not much information about it in actual mythology, but generally it is very similar to Valhalla, and it's the same honor to go there. The main difference between Valhalla and Folkvanger is that Odin rules over Valhalla, and Freya rules over Folkvanger. Valhalla means Hall of the Slain, and it is ruled over by Odin. In both places, Valhalla and Folkvanger, honorable soldiers who are slain in battle train and prepare to fight along Odin and Freya in final world-ending battle, Ragnarok. Ragnarok is basically end of the world, an apocalyptic battle between gods and demons. The demons are led by destruction god Loki. In my opinion, even if Folkvanger were featured in the Northman, Hamlet would still go to Valhalla, because as I mentioned before, Odin watches over him, and Odin is the ruler of Valhalla. Let's discuss Valkyrie teeth now. No, she is not wearing braces. The thing on her teeth is some form of teeth tattoo. This is a real thing Vikings did back in the day. It was made by grinding horizontal grooves in teeth. and then filling them with resin from trees. It is not really clear why they did this, but most reasonable explanation is to scare their enemies. Such teeth are found in Viking warriors. For artistic purposes they used this on Valkyrie in the Northman, but in the real life only men had these tattoos. You probably noticed that Hamlet's name and movie's plot are somewhat similar to the Shakespeare's play Hamlet. This is not a coincidence because they are connected, but not in a way you may think. Shakespeare's Hamlet is actually a retale of much older Viking story, the legend of Hamlet. Please note, though, that the Northman is not a direct equalization and the story is loosely based on this legend. I would also like to note that Viking mythology is gatherings of poems, stories and hearsay. Although there definitely are main figures and events, much of the myth is open for interpretation. Mythology by itself is not hard facts, and the Northmen most definitely use some artistic ways on interpreting it. Previously I mentioned that some of the characters' actions may not be so realistic. I would like to say that I'm mentioning this only for the purpose of analyzing the movie. I don't actually think that this is a bad thing in the Northman because it is supposed to be a dramatized and artistic version of the Viking world. Let's start with all the paranormal and ritualistic stuff in the movie. Visions Hamlet has don't stay in the paranormal world. For example, Fox really guides him in the real world, and the ravens release him from captivity also in the real world. There is a sword which can be used only during the night, and it can be unsheathed in the daylight. This also happens in the real world. These are clearly some things which wouldn't happen in the real world. Also, the actions of people sometimes are dramatized. For example, when Hamlet at the end of the movie just jumps in the water to swim back to Iceland. This is extremely dramatic act, but I found out that water temperature in summer in Iceland can reach 52 Fahrenheit. This is most certainly very cold water, but the hypothermia wouldn't kick in immediately, though this act of swimming is somewhat realistic for a trained person. The other scene that caught my attention was when at the end Hamlet kills his mother and her youngest son. When Fjolnir sees this, the fight doesn't commence. Instead they decide to fight an epic fight at the top of the volcano. Of course, this greatly serves the movie itself, but this would never happen in real life. The story of the Northman for me was easily predictable, but it didn't ruin the movie. The feeling of the story was like listening to a good song for the first time, but knowing where the melody would go. I liked that the story was fairly simple, but didn't become too cheesy. This is a classic revenge story, but without the good end. You see, there can be a good end if anger and resentment rules over your whole life. But the ending of the movie where protagonist dies may be perceived like a bad thing for us, but for Hamlet himself there couldn't be a greater end than dying in a battle and going to Valhalla. For him it was the happy end. I also really liked the motive with Fjolnir. When the movie starts, Fjolnir is clearly a villain, but at the end of the movie you find out that he may not be as evil as you thought at the start. The killing of Hamlet's father was driven by love for Hamlet's mother, and Queen Gudrun was never a noble woman who wanted to marry King Aurvandil. She was just a slave forced into a marriage, and Hamlet was an unwanted child. After viewer realizes this, everything becomes much more greyish, not just black and white, good and evil. In a world driven by war and brutality, there is not much place for a good people. And this is what the Northman conveys perfectly. This is more realistic depiction of real life than any details in the Viking attire, old language and landscape. This makes viewer think, and that's the sign of a great movie. Fjolnir's story also kind of reflects in Hamlet himself. He also falls in love with the slave girl and saves her from her captors. It's the same thing Fjolnir did. It just happens to be that they are enemies. They are slaves to their destinies and are fated to die battling each other. There is also a horror movie approach when Hamlet decided to terrorize Fjolnir's village. In order to make Fjolnir panic, he started to kill Fjolnir's men one by one during the night time. He also left them in very gruesome poses, just like some classic horror movie maniac would do. It was kind of interesting to see this here. It indicates that Hamlet is clearly not just a good guy seeking justice. He is out there for bloody revenge, and he will do anything to achieve this. He also killed his mother's sons without hesitation. It was never acknowledged in the movie, but they were Hamlet's half-brothers. The last battle with Fjolnir on the top of the volcano was epic. This felt like the climax of the movie, which means that all the build-up was well executed. The movie had the right pacing. The end of the battle and the movie itself when they both die is probably the most epic ending for this kind of movie. The scene with the beheading and sword through the heart is super dramatic, but it suits perfectly this movie. There could be no other outcome. The Northman is clearly a great movie. It is 2 hours and 17 minutes long, but for me it didn't feel that long, which is an indication of a good movie. All the mythology, symbolism, dramatization and Iceland's epic landscape just screams epic. And these ingredients are well mixed together in this movie, making it a truly great watching experience. When I was making this review and analysis, it felt like this will be a memorable movie. The aftertaste was good, which is also a sign of something great. I give this movie 9 out of 10. Thank you for watching.